So hi, welcome everybody to this CECA conference with Andrew Cubitt speaking. Andrew is the Procurement and Supply Chain Director from HS2, so a super client, I suppose we'd call you really, Andrew, wouldn't we? Yeah, just a few things to mention early doors. This is CECA's 25th anniversary conference, so we've been going for 25 years. I certainly haven't been there all the 25 years, but I was one of you before I joined here, and CECA's always been a very important part of the civil engineering industry. We've been planning the conference since March, and it's really good that you can attend this, and hope you will be able to attend one or two of the other events. It's a shame we can't hold it physically, but it seemed a risky thing to do, really. So we've gone for this online event. This is bound to due to COVID, of course. What we're focusing on through this is delivering better, and Andrew is here to talk about how HS2 is delivering better. Just a few points of housekeeping. The session is being recorded, and while the speaking's going on, please could you put your cameras off, and not you, Andrew, you're not allowed to do this, and mute your microphones, so that we sort of maximize the bandwidth. There will be a Q&A session, and at that point I'd ask you to, I think we'll try and progress this by that putting the hands up method rather than typing stuff in, although if you want to type in notes, please do that. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Andrew, and you have your slides and you can share your slides with us, I think, yeah?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Excellent. Thank you.
So thank you, Bill, for the warm welcome there. And yeah, today I should be talking a bit about the delivering better at HS2 and what we mean by delivering better. So let me just share these slides for you. So delivering better outcomes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means at HS2 to deliver better outcomes. I'm going to talk a bit about how we as a client have tried to deliver better outcomes, but also what we're doing with respect to the procurement reform, as well as the construction playbook, and how that is also driving to the point where we're delivering better. I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then I think there's going to be some Q&A after that. So I do encourage you all to put your questions in the chat, and we'll come to those a bit later on. So what have we been doing at HS2? Well, I've spoken to many of you before, and many of you are probably a part of the program already. There's phase 1 and phase 2A and phase 2B. So essentially 2 phases. And in phase 1, the construction is already underway. So the main civils works is already underway for phase 1. We're supporting 20,000 jobs nationwide in that work. But also we procured three of the phase stations. So that also is underway in Euston, Aldecombe and now Curzon Street, and the interchange is currently out to market. So again, phase 1 is progressing at a good rate. In phase 2A, we received the hybrid bill and roll assent, and that's to achieve. So construction is due to start on site in 2024. And then phase 2B, hybrid bill is being prepared, and also the integrated rail plan was announced this week. So the reason why I'm going to start here is because we've gone on a journey since 2015 at HS2 to deliver these huge programs of work. And the reason why actually it's quite beneficial to talk about it in two stages and 2 phases is because we have been trying to deliver better outcomes and learn from our lessons in phase 1 to develop into phase 2 particularly. So as we go through this today, I'm going to talk a bit about what we've done in phase 1, but also then in phase 2. Here's some pictures of, some will be familiar to you, of the work that's ongoing in phase 1 already. So tunnel boring machines have been launched, and there was a big fanfare at those launches because that's a big step for the project. So they're currently underground and still pushing out huge numbers of amounts of earth every day and progressing very well. As I mentioned, the main works at Aldecombe station has already started as well, and that's another big station to procure and also then to construct. So lots of activity going along the route as it stands. But also, I want to try to compare that to the work that's happening on the rail systems, which is currently in procurement. So much of the work and much of the commercial work that we do in HS2 is looking at how we're going to get best value from the organisations that are going to bid for it. And in rail systems, we've certainly looked at that. So when we talk about delivering better outcomes, it's very much about talking about, well, what's right for the market at the time and what's right for the market for delivering of those contracts. So you'll see that these activities of boring tunnels, building stations, and then construction railways are all very different. And when they're all very, very different, you need to have a different commercial construct to deliver the right outcome for those works. So I just want to make that point, and I think this slide helps a little bit around actually the activities are very different. Building a station is incredibly different to major earthworks, incredibly different to the technicality of signalling equipment and delivering signalling. So it's a project which is not only logistically and geographically spread, but also very complicated and complex, which is why we do have to think about how we do deliver the outcomes that are required for HS2. Our contractors, our tier one contractors in phase one, are crucial to helping us learn from those points. And we have a very good relationship with all our tier one contractors. And actually, we're starting to work with some of our tier twos via our tier ones to understand exactly what is working for main works and station contractors. So here's a page which shows all the joint ventures that are going on at the moment in phase one. And through our partnering boards, through our integrated project teams, through our collaboration hub, we're constantly learning from what's happening on the ground from a supply of materials and labour, but also from a delivery perspective of some of the work that's ongoing across the route. So these sessions are constantly happening with our delivery teams and also our commercial teams. And part of the wider team that deals with this, the commercial and supply chain team, is constantly talking to those members in the IPTs, but also our tier twos to understand what's going to be happening next. I mentioned the railway systems contract and where we've learned some lessons already. So, like I said, these are all different types of contracts to the work that's already happened in phase one. They are complicated for sure, but also they are interesting from perspective of actually there's lots of different types of activity to be done. So what we need to do is understand how we might contract for some of those. And what we've proposed here is an alliance across these contracts. Now, why an alliance? Well, this is an integrated program of work, and having an integrated program means that each of these contractors will work in accordance with one another. So why does that deliver a better outcome? Well, we've learned from our phase one work that actually this is a huge expansive work to be undertaken. Therefore, we need to understand how the program will be integrated more generally. So we're developing commercial constructs and commercial outcomes which will deliver those best outcomes. And that's what HS2 is really pushing for at the moment. And that's what you're seeing on the railway systems contracts. These contracts are currently out to market. They're currently at invitation to tender stage. The alliance is also part of that invitation to tender stage as well. So this is work which is ongoing. And I think as we get to the point where we start to award the contracts and stand up the alliance, that will be a great interest to the industry and how that operates. It's a new way of looking at how these construction contracts will be applied. So the indicative timescales for phase 2A are on the sheet. So there's a design delivery partner, a main civils works contractor, and then advanced civils works contractors. Now, less so about the timescales, but more about the types of contracts that are on this page. And I want to just bring to bear why we've constructed it in this way from a commercial and procurement perspective. The reason is we've looked at how some of the phase one activity has been undertaken. We've looked at how alliances have worked in maybe national highways, which I believe you're going to hear about a bit more later. But we've also thought about, well, how would we deliver the great expansive work across the overall scheme, which is why we have a design and delivery partner, and that's already out to market. The main civils works contractors for phase two, again, we've learned from phase one, it has worked really, really well having joint ventures and packages of work. But we also know that the industry is changing, and the construction industry particularly has gone through many changes over the last 18 months through COVID, but also many changes also over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. So we need to understand those changes, and also when we're ready to procure the civils works, we're going to take on board the feedback from suppliers and supply chain at that moment. The civils works are again another piece of work which is similar to phase one, but maybe slightly more confined, but then also with more complexity, maybe with lots more viaducts. So all these things are taken into account when we think about how we're going to deliver better outcomes for HS2, the taxpayer, but also the supply chain that are involved with these pieces of work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about procurement reform and what's happened so far. So you may have heard there has been some work that's been undertaken by the Cabinet Office and the Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office to think about how we might reform procurement in the public sector. And this probably is where you're going to see a lot of interesting changes over the next 2 or 3 years as we start to bring out some of these ideas. I think it's recognised in the public sector that we need to make it easier for firms to bid for government work. And one of the statements that's clear by the new the thinking already from Cabinet Office is that we need to think about how we can provide best value and get excellent value for the goods and services that we buy by making it easy for the firms to bid for that work. This means transparency, and transparency is one of the fundamental principles of the public sector already. But we need to join up how the procurement systems will work. So this is about a system reform to see how the government will show how credentials of suppliers are already on systems and how we can actually make that more visible to buyers. And that hopefully will reduce the overall burden and the complexity of tendering, which I think is something I've been trying to do at HS2 since I've started. So the bottom right-hand box then, the overall burden, this is part of the procurement reform, but it's something that's happened already. And we have been looking at how we rationalise the PQ, how we use PAS 91, how we think about using standards for pre-qualification, and also how we think about using uniformity in the questions that we ask. And that helps because then suppliers are able to deliver against something which is very standard every single procurement that they see. The real test should be at the ITT, and that's where we're going to focus the tests. So moving on to maybe the other parts of this. So where it says utilise commercial skills to the full extent. So this is talking about how the public sector wishes to utilise their skills to the full extent to deliver the best outcomes again for the taxpayer. This means that there's going to be potentially a new flexible procedure, and that flexible procedure will allow suppliers to gain better understanding of the requirements before tendering. And I think in the construction industry, this is really important. I think one of the challenges of these major construction procurement projects and contracts is that some of them are quite high risk. High risk because they're high value, and actually if they are a target cost contract, then there's more risk that maybe can be borne by the supply chain more generally. And I think the other point we need to think about is how we design and where the design gets to a maturity before we then tender. And this is about how we, again, get better value for the public sector, but also give greater transparency back to the supply chain before they bid. So what we need to do is think about how we're going to continue to have that conversation with the supply chain throughout the life cycle. And I think in particular in the construction sector, we need to think very carefully about how we offer that information up. The main thing that the reforms are looking to do is to deliver national and local government priorities, and to some extent, to a greater extent, that has been possible before, and that's where this whole reform starts. So that bottom green box on the bottom left is really where they're trying to enable the award of contracts for the benefit of society and not just for the lowest price. Now, you've seen some of that already, and quite a lot of the work that's happened out of the Cabinet Office already is about social value. And you'll see some, I know that some of you will be aware that in many of the government contracts at the moment, up to 10% of the overall evaluation score should be on social value policies or social value areas. Now, HS2, we've been building that into our contracts for a while, both at PQQ and ICT. We think about the skills, education, and employment that's required, and we think about how we're going to meet our EDI thresholds, and also think about our health and safety record. So these things are built as part of the overall scheme of the contracting process, and of course we are supportive of that in our consultation response to the Green Paper. So we are being consulted as part of the Green Paper, and we are providing that response back. And I think we already have done actually. With these key reforms coming in, probably not next year, but the year after, it's really important to think about how we are going to deliver the outcomes we require for HS2 with these reforms, and make sure that we get all feedback from the supply chain to make sure that we're building in the thinking that's coming from your side, because you're the recipients of these tendering activities, and therefore that's where we're welcoming any views on that perspective. Probably also that you're familiar with is the construction playbook, and the construction playbook really was designed to articulate how to do construction in the public sector. It's a very helpful document, I think, for the purposes of just understanding what the key functions are in building something or constructing something. And you've got to remember, not every organisation is like HS2. At HS2, we're very lucky because we've got a huge number of very talented engineers, delivery people, commercial people, procurement people who have been around the construction industry their whole life, or the rail industry their whole life. Whereas many people in the wider public sector will often they may have some smaller construction projects of 10 to 30 million pounds in a refurbishment or a build for a local education centre or something else on a national basis. So it's important that we get some consistency in how you as suppliers will see public sector respond and provide construction work out to the market. So I welcome the construction playbook when it came in, and particularly around some of the principles which I've shared on this sheet, and we'll go through some of them and how HS2 has gone through some of these. So with early supply chain involvement, we've been doing quite a bit of that over the last, since HS2 founded really in 2016. So and for me, it means a few things. So certainly early supplier involvement with the strategy, and we do prior to procurements, we always engage the market to understand suppliers' views. And we've had some great feedback in those sessions, and actually it helps structure our thinking before we then get authority to approve and go through the process of actual procurement. So I've always recommended that we do that. But it also can mean it's about developing the business case and the projects and programs up front with the supply chain. So we get some views from the supply chain, we get some ideas about how the life cycle will work for the overall construction program, and any issues that are raised are then developed before the strategy is started. ESI, though, is also used where we might think about that maybe the scheme is not fully developed from a design perspective and we need more engagement with that, or we might use a different outcome-based approach to deliver what the contracting authority requires. So these types of engagement processes are important to us, and I think at HS2, we do believe in you get a better outcome if you have had those conversations up front. Modern methods of construction is a common theme across the construction playbook, and it's probably the buzz phrase, if you like, of what happened from the construction playbook and maybe what's in the market and industry at the moment. Now, at HS2, we are thinking a lot about MMC, and particularly off-site manufacturer, because we recognise that the routes and the work is complex, and and delivering that can be complex, but also you might be able to build in different types of economies if you have an off-site manufacturing mechanism. So we are looking at modular construction. We are looking at low carbon materials like concrete and maybe low carbon production in steel. We are also looking at off-site manufacture and modular manufacture of certain assets across the route. So these are the types of things that we would be considering already at HS2. So again, probably we're quite lucky in that we're already down the path of considering these things prior to the construction playbook going live. But for MMC, it's an important part of the wider piece across the construction industry. And I think where we need help is probably help from the industry to understand exactly how MMC can be a benefit to each of our programs at HS2, but also probably to the wider public sector programs that you'll come along and see. You'll see quite a bit around the roles of the SME. And I am a really, really big fan and promoter of the role of the SME in the long-term pipelines that we're constructing. So in the construction playbook, there's a big push about SMEs. It's also true in the procurement reform. Now, I do believe that the SMEs in the industry will develop some of the agility that we require and some of the innovation that we require, which I know, having working with and in big organizations before, it's very hard to get some of that agility and innovation. So it's our job as a client, and I think working with our tier one contractors to really encourage that innovation through our supply chain. So where do I mean? I mean, actually, there's quite a lot of innovation that's required in the way we're going to operate this program, but also how we might capture some of the benefits from either low carbon movements of heavy goods, or even think about just supply of materials, supply of labour, which when you talk about a national program of many millions of tons of movements of both goods and concrete and also spoil, that is something that we need to think about on a strategic level. And I think our supply chains can help identify some of the pinch points in both supply and also the provision of labour, and that can help across our overall supply chain, and that's where I think we need our SMEs to play a big part. One of the final things I'm going to say about the construction playbook was around the benchmarking and should cost models. Now, this is probably an area which is probably the most complicated for the construction industry, because this is really about how, before the procurement starts, how we're going to show best value and how we're going to show that the benchmarking that we're going to do means that we have sufficient, I guess, overall budget to do the construction program we have in place. It helps the key decision makers in the right place, probably in central government, with the right insights and data to be basically informed and intelligent decision makers. And that's what this is all about. So the projects and programs need to be able to produce these should cost models before going out to market. Now, this can be quite challenging, and depending on how you're designing something, the maturity of that design, and also what you're buying and what you're building, this can be very challenging, in fact. It's probably slightly more straightforward where you have something that's tried and tested, like building a building, even maybe a station, which is complicated, but actually you have some parameters. But where there's a huge elongated program of construction and delivery, then that can be more of a challenge. So this is an area which HS2 is doing a lot of development work at the moment. We're thinking about how we're going to show some should cost models around our construction program. We're looking at how we have developed things in other industries, but also how we can apply it here to really show that we've got a cost model which works for the industry, but also a cost model which can work for getting the approval that's required as we go through various gates. So hopefully that's been helpful in the two sort of reform areas that HS2 is looking at, both the procurement reform but also the construction playbook. And I hope you get the sense that we at HS2 are probably slightly ahead on both these things, but also we are really, really passionate about some of the principles that are in both those two documents. Now, I've talked a little bit about SMEs already, but I want to talk a bit more about it because I'm so passionate about it and I really, really do believe in it. So what we absolutely do is, and we have been since we started in 2013, we've had some really clear guidance about how we're going to incorporate small and medium enterprises into our supply chain. And that guidance tends to be around how we're going to ensure that our tier one contracts are and contractors are pushing out the procurements via Compete for our website where we engage all our SMEs, but also how they're going to really follow some of the principles that we would procure around transparency, openness, and fairness. So there's clear pipelines and clear guidance about how we'd like to incorporate SMEs into our supply chain. And that leads to the tender and contract requirements, both at the tier one level, but also then at tier two and tier three level, because all these levels flow through. And that's why we have had such a good response from our SME market more generally. I think it still is quite challenging, and we recognise there are some still challenges for the SMEs to be engaged, but there are also some great success stories and things like Meet the Contractor event, which was last week, as well as the sessions we've been doing with Andrew Stevenson up and down the country to engage SMEs, helps with these events. So these events, workshops and forums have really helped to raise the profile of how we've engaged with SMEs and also some of the success stories we've had so far. And again, roundtables, networks and trade associations like CECA and others are also great ways to get out this message. And I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you a bit more about it, because I think if we can get some more small medium enterprise into the supply chain, that's great. It helps us deal with some of the problems that we might see. It really helps bring some specialist skills to our supply chain, which I think we need in this industry. Now, delivering better outcomes, and I'm going to focus a little bit on carbon now, and the carbon net zero pledges around zero carbon by 2035, which is something that's you've seen in wider government more generally. That to innovate to that level, you're going to need to have an innovation environment. So for HS2 to deliver better outcomes, we've recognised that we do need to have a theme of innovation, but probably actually even more than theme, and that absolute underpinning of innovation to have this environment where we can bring in new ideas. I've talked a little bit about SMEs. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually also develop relationships with trade bodies, but also academia and research to understand where this innovation might come from. And I think the carbon objective and the challenges that we face as an industry around getting to net zero is something which we've all got to think about very, very carefully. And unless we do some innovation right now, then I think by 2035, even by 2030, it'll be way too late to hit the targets that we need to by 2035. So my view is that it's our job to really start thinking about how we innovate in low carbon, both construction, materials, and also movements, to really do that now, so we can start trying and testing some of this over the next 10 years, so that by 2035 we can hit the target. So it's great to be at HS2 for that reason. HS2 is a long program. We've got a lot of long relationships. We've got a lot of stuff to do, and therefore it's great to be able to be part of that journey. So where we're pushing the team at the moment to try to deliver better outcomes is to innovate, particularly in the carbon area, other areas too, but particularly in this carbon area. So we're thinking about how we might have innovation with small SMEs and startup funding models. We're looking at entrepreneurial environments, ideas, particularly technology. If you talk about carbon again, think about what technology is going to be a big thing in the future, how you track that carbon emissions, what kind of technologies will reduce it. And to some extent, we need to talk to our manufacturers as well, because they're the ones that will be manufacturing low carbon concrete and also different types of steel kilns to have low carbon steel. So I just want to bring that innovation bit to life a little bit, because that's one area we're really looking at. We're looking at lots of other areas of innovation, how we deliver the program, and innovation to how we manage the program as well. So these are things we're working through with our tier ones, and that innovation environment is something we're, again, that's how we deliver some of the better outcomes at HS2. This is the thing about reducing the carbon footprint. We're very lucky in that we've designed an amazing station which is going to have an incredibly low carbon footprint, and actually they're BREEAM Excellence rated. So from a design perspective, we are designing some of the best architecture and stations in the world, but we're also working hard to reduce that carbon footprint. And as I said, I think this is a joint effort here. This isn't an HS2 mandate only. This is about the whole construction industry, and we as an industry, we need to think very, very carefully about what we're going to do first and make sure that we do things now so that it'll have a big impact for our future. I did mention the Meet the Contractor event already. That was last week for stations, but it's also going to be next week for main works. These are great events, really, really good events to engage with the market, engage with the supply chain, think about some of these points around innovation. We have speakers who will talk from HS2 and from our supply chain on these key points around deliver the program, reducing costs and lowering carbon. So these are points which we're always opportunities come through and through to bear at the Meet the Contractors events, and it's really interesting to be part of that. I was part of the last year's one and had a great session with Skanska around collaboration, actually, and that there's, understanding how we can collaborate with our tier ones and how that collaboration can then be passed through the supply chain was a quite an insightful point, and really helpful to have across the whole business. So helpful point to have there. And this year I've been involved with the opening sessions. I'll be involved again next week. So I encourage you, and please encourage your supply chains to be part of those Meet the Contractor events. Finally, then, I just wanted to talk a little bit, just to close, really, about our HS2 supplier guidance. And we always try to end on this point. And the reason for that is I understand that you have to say something 7 times for people to understand or remember it. So we always talk about the fact that HS2's got a lot of collateral on its website to get some guidance to how to get involved with HS2. The reason why we want everyone to get involved with HS2 is because the more suppliers that get involved, the more ideas we'll have, and how we're going to eventually deliver those better outcomes. So always encourage to contact our supply chain team directly. I've got one of the members of our team online today, Robin Lappish, who you probably have met before. And also how we work with business organisations. So all these things are available as free resources on our website and elsewhere, and I'd always encourage you to have a look at them. So with that, thank you very much for the time and listening to me today. I believe we've got some questions, so I'll just close that presentation and happy to take the questions.
Hi, thank you very much, Andrew. That's been really interesting. Thanks for all that information. We've received some questions in advance. I didn't spot any questions coming in on the chat, so I think we'll keep what MC describes as waving the Simpson hand as a way of putting forward the questions. But I've got an initial one for you off the list of pre-put in questions. You've procured some civils packages on phase 2A through frameworks operated by Scape and Crown Commercial Services. Could you just explain what's driven you to do that?
Yeah, so we always look at various routes to market for different types of services, and on Crown Commercial Services, there are frameworks are in place where many of the contractors who can undertake that work have been deemed to already pass and be on those frameworks. Again, on Scape, there are GI contractors particularly who have undertaken work at HS2 as well, and for certain work, either it might be a certain either geographic location, priority, or type. We might procure via Scape, but also via those CCS frameworks. So it really does depend on the requirement. That's probably the answer.
But these not the main contracts you've talked about, or the main enabling works contracts. They're contracts earlier doors than that even.
So some of them are GI contracts, I believe. So they're ground investigation contracts for particularly via Scape. I think the route to market for the advanced civils works for phase 2 was via the CCS framework, in fact. So there are 2 packages there of about £120 million each. And I believe that's being procured via that framework.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and it's great to hear you're getting on with ground investigation, because that's what we all need for certainty, really. So Andrew Nash has his hand up. Andrew is from Balfour Beatty, I know. But when next you ask questions, please could you say who you're from as you introduce yourself? Thank you. So over to you, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks. Yes, Andrew Nash from Balfour Beatty. Put my hand up, put it down, put it again. Thank you. It was a great presentation again, and I suppose really just developing what Bill was talking about there, Andrew, in terms of phase 2A main civils works. I noticed from your programme on the slide that you talked about procurement commencing Q4 21. Well, obviously, there's not too many weeks left of Q4 21. What's the plan for procurement? And indeed, I suppose most importantly, the sort of lot structure you're thinking of. I know in the past you've been thinking about geographic versus discipline, and possibly and maybe ideally some kind of hybrid of the 2 of those, for at least for some aspects. Could you give us an update on that, please, Andrew?
Yeah, so I probably should have said on that slide, actually, the quarters that are on that slide are actually our financial quarters, not calendar quarters. So we've got a little bit more time there, Andrew. So up until the end of March is our Q4, so we've got a bit more time. But that being said, I think we will be re-engaging with the supply chain and market about the timing of that particular piece of work. The reason for it is that there is obviously a lot of complexity. So you're talking about £2.2 billion worth of civils works, and I think what we've engaged upon before with the market and supply chain is this concept of 6 packages that are grid geographic, and those packages are somewhere between 250 million and I think 700 million pounds was the original thinking. Now, what I would say is that thinking hasn't departed from that. So we are still thinking that the right solution here, based upon the feedback from the supply chain and based upon where the market is not to have the, let's say, one lot mega package of 2.2 billion pounds. That doesn't feel like the right solution. That being said, what we're looking to do on the framework is pure flexibility. So the idea of frameworks is to have a flexible arrangement where that strategy can change. And although the basis of the strategy will be on these 6 packages, the fact is we would look to work out a way of having flexibility. So in the future, when the DDP's on site, so the design delivery partner is on site and helping us with the scheme design, that scheme design might dictate actually you want to slightly cut those packages in slightly different ways. So we're looking to think about how we develop that flexibility, which is why it might be a slightly later start than Q4, but not by much, because we do need to get on and get it done. So hopefully that sort of is a round way of answering the questions. That it's very similar to what we've looked at already. We're thinking about flexibility for the future, and we're going to come back to the whole supply chain and engage them again on some of that thinking prior to launching that particular procurement.
I know one of the ideas you had was to maybe hive out the viaducts out of the geographic sections, so that actually you had some benefit, some value benefit of delivering that as a single contract across those geographies. Is that still possibly an option?
I mean, I'm going to lay my cards on the table and be honest about that, and I think that's a great idea. Now, I think the supply chain has a mixed view on it. So, and I think it depends on who you're speaking to work together or not. Here's why I think it's a good idea. So I think it's good because you can think about designs which are modular. You can think about repeatable manufacturing processes. You can set up manufacturing plants that are near the site with particular viaducts. You can think about how you might impact low carbon concrete. So I'm not saying you can't do that if you've got 6 contractors doing different viaducts across the piece, but I'm just saying that's a bit more tough. So I think there's probably some advantages by having a contract which is for viaducts, even if it's for the design and the manufacture of it. maybe not the installation, but that's all up for grabs and all for thought, and we'll re-engage the market on that point before we launch.
Absolutely agree. Must be a value benefit in there. Anyway, thank you very much, Andrew.
No wavy hands, but just one thing I would ask there is, do you feel you've got a tender process that, as you say, starts early, well, the end of this financial year and goes right through from memory, getting on for 2 years for the main contracts? So by the time someone is engaged to work on viaducts, your design presumably will have progressed another 2 years forward. So the opportunity for them to bring innovation in and do things differently and all the things that's positive about them working on it, wouldn't it be too late?
Well, the design of the viaducts is, I mean, you're right. If you take those timescales, that would be right. But obviously, the viaduct design probably has a slightly longer shelf life than it does for the civils, the early civils, and the earthworks design. So, to put it bluntly, the bit we need to focus on first is digging the hole, and we also need to focus on the design of the viaducts. But the DDP is also instructed to build in some of those concepts around in their scheme design for the viaducts, and we recognise that we are going to need some specialist viaduct designers as part of that process. So I don't think it is too late. I think the civils works will be on the civils framework will be in place in time for the have an influence on the scheme design. The DDP will have an ability to influence that themselves, and actually the timescales for the overall scheme design for viaducts will be a little bit later than the earthworks.
Okay. So I don't see anybody else coming up. So I will, it's probably raising a point rather than a question, but if you engage an organisation to help you design and build the components ready for the viaduct, and you then have a tender list where they're on it to build it along with other contractors, that might be quite difficult to get a proper competition if it was felt that one company had such a sort of in on it that they couldn't do anything, that as an outsider, you couldn't compete with them. And I do think that, I think you addressed that issue with slab track many years ago, insofar as you said, well, you've either got to be the people who make it, or you've got to be the people who install it. You've got to choose which side of the line you drop on.
Yeah, and I think that observation is right, and that's one of the things we're trying to tackle. I mean, taking the viaducts again. I mean, I mentioned, that I believe there is some benefit from having a single design for the viaducts, and then repeatable manufacturing processes. So design and manufacture seems that you want that as productionized as possible. But the installation, I agree. There'll be different points, and therefore the handoff needs to be thought about carefully, and that's the bit we need to test as a strategy with the supply chain.
Okay. I've got a question come on the comments here from Simon Coultas. Do you get any repeated areas of feedback from the supply chain that you find impossible to incorporate, and what drives that the conflict if that is the case?
Well, I'll start and maybe it comes to Robin, because Robin hears a lot of the feedback from the supply chain. But I think we do, and we have done probably since 2018. The repeated feedback was, this all just takes too long. It's all too difficult to tender. So the Reducing Supplier Burden initiative was started in 2018. We've reduced that by streamlining the PQQ as much as possible. And I think we've also done some work in the ITT. We're very, very conscious about how much time and effort it takes to respond to tender. And that's why we always think very, very carefully about having a two-stage contract rather than a single-stage contract. A single-stage contract would require the supply chain to do a lot more design to get to a particular target cost type of arrangement in the tendering cycle. And we believe that would add burden, because it adds huge amounts of cost. So we've steered away from that as a strategy generally, and also we've reduced the amount of time taken on PQQs since 2018 to where we are now. And there's still some more work to do, like I mentioned in the presentation. We're still look at the reforms and how we might reduce it even further. But Robin, is there anything else which you hear from supply chain more generally?
Thanks, Andrew. Afternoon, everyone. It's Robin Lapish, Senior Supply Chain Manager at HS2. Good to see you all this afternoon. Just to echo those comments, really, Andrew, I think certainly from what I see, the feedback we get from the supply chain is incredibly pragmatic and constructive in the main, and we've taken steps to incorporate that where we can. I mean, an example of that is in the rail systems space, where this time last year, the market was asking for greater clarity on, for instance, our commercial strategy. So we followed that up with a dedicated webinar briefing specific to our proposed Rail Systems Alliance to really sort of spend time. That was a 3-hour session to really walk them through the actual bones of that strategy and how that's going to play out in reality in advance of the ITTs that went live for the core systems packages in the summer. So, you know, where we do have consensus and what the supply chain wants to find out more about, then we obviously take that away and we'll follow that up to try and better inform the supply chain and in turn better inform ourselves and maximize the confidence that we have in our strategies. So we certainly welcome feedback at any moment, whether it be related to a procurement strategy or whether it be in general. So, and there's mechanisms, well-established mechanisms in HS2 to obtain that. So I don't think there's anything specific, Andrew, to add to that.
Good. So the overall period from sort of launching at the start of your PQQ to the point where you award your contracts, from my memory, the phase 1 contracts took about 2 years to do all of that. When looking at what you're saying it could be 18 months this time?
Yeah, so I think we are saying it will be 18 months for civils work, so it'll be shorter. I'll be honest, I'd like to get it even quicker than that. But the truth is,
welcome that from the supply.
Yeah. But actually, in the 18 months, there's up to 6 months of time for the supplier to respond to tender. So, which still means it's 12 months of HS2 evaluating and going through governance and approvals. So that's, in my view, still too long. We're trying to reduce that as part of our governance review that we're doing with central government, and I think that's a bit we can probably improve on. But I'm always very keen to give as much time as I can to supply chain to respond to tender.
Right. I mean, we like time to respond, but when you look at the overall thing, it's like sort of 2 years for the team. I know the team grows and waxes and wanes through the course of it, but it is 2 years when the inquiry takes place. So there's no flappy hands. I don't think there's any more text come in. So I'll ask you one of the questions that came in advance. How are you managing the risks of public protest, and have you plans to adjust, or is this a level of protest in line with your expectations? So I realise that sort of particularly at the moment, probably, you know, there are areas where you're getting quite a lot of protests coming, particularly as you sort of leave the Chilterns and head north, I would say.
I mean, this is an automated program, so there will be people who are absolutely supportive of all of HS2, and there will be people who are not supportive, and so you're always going to get that conflict. And I think, unfortunately, we have seen a number of public protests and I think more activity against along the line of route. For us, it's about safety, and safety is one of our core values, and it's our utmost priority that we continue to work closely with how our agents and our emergency services that are planning and delivering for all this. So we always respond to those illegal protester incidents in a way which is very positive, but also think about safety. So, and we fully respect the right for these people to protest as well. So it's their right to protest peacefully, but we can't condone any illegal actions that we've seen against some of our sites this year, particularly as it puts people's lives in danger, but also places a huge burden on the taxpayer for the cost of removal of these protesters or the cost of the emergency services. So I think that's probably where we are on it more generally as a principle.
Good, thank you. So we've got one come in on the chat line, as it were, from Jez Haskins, who works for Vancy. Yes, thanks for the Phase 2A update, Andrew. Did I hear correctly? You're looking at a framework for the delivery of the 6 packages viaducts.
So it will be a framework. So we are for main civils for Phase 2A, we are looking for a framework, and it'll be a framework of contractors on that, so to allow for the flexibility in the future. So how we're going to bring some of those packages of work to market. So initially it'll be a framework for contractors. Yeah.
Good, okay. But going way back, these people here, I'm sorry, we got a very quiet audience, haven't we? But I think I can make up for that. When the whole process kicked off with Phase 1, I worked for a contractor and was involved with the bidding process. And the contracts on Phase 1 are framework contracts for the main civils. And the idea is that these frameworks would flow onto the Phase 2 works. Was that something you decided not to do through the scope of things, or did I just misunderstand it?
So it's
No,
you didn't misremember. So initially the Phase 1 contracts are called off of frameworks, and those frameworks are flexible and they can be used for the ability to do some Phase 2A work, not 2B, but Phase 2A work. So and sure, there's going to be an interface point between the Phase 1 work and the Phase 2A as well. So as part of the overall strategy, it's a consideration that we're looking at, and also it'll be a consideration for our design delivery partner once they're on side and on client side. So these things are in amongst the use of all the tools we can use to go out to market and procure this work.
Okay, good. So when you split this Phase 2A up into the 6 packages, will you be able to tell everybody very early whether they are typically, whether there are a few at 200 and you mentioned 200 million and 700 million as the prices? Because for many contractors who have phoned in or have dialed into this conference today, a £200 million would be a scheme that they could do on their own, whereas a 700 million, they'd probably want a JV for it. And also I can imagine some of the perhaps smaller contractors thinking, well, if 2 or 3 of us smaller companies get together, 200 million would be well within our capabilities. And these things take a lot of there's a lot to do before the whole tender kicks off to get these JVs sorted out. At what point will this packaging become, I mean, I'm not asking for, I don't think anybody's asking for clarity, but if you said, well, actually, we think, as you work north, there's one for 200 million, and then at this point, it'll probably change to something that's 400 and so on through it. People would find that very, very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, what you're articulating, Bill, is something which I'm very keen on, which is to provide opportunities for suppliers to think about how they might work with HS2. I don't want every single package to be one which suppliers have to joint venture for. And if they feel that they have packages of £200 to £300 million, which they can deliver directly, that sounds great, and I would encourage that. So my aspiration is to set out the financial side of how these packages will be brought to market, so that suppliers can bring their ideas. And the truth is, there are some complexities in the Phase 2A delivery. So it's not just about the financial; it's also about the assets, and the assets include viaducts, but also a big tunnel and a big tunneling section. So, and I think you're going to probably find some suppliers will JV because of the types of assets, and you might need a good contractor with a good tunneler to do the tunneling section, for instance. So I think it does depend on not just the finances, but also where the focus will be for that JV or that entity, and that will be all shared before we go out to market.
The earlier you can tell us, the better. So Julian Gatwood has put his hand up. If you could turn your camera and mic on.
Yeah, hello, Andrew. So Julian Gatwood from Vinci Construction. So obviously the JVs that are delivering the main work civils at the moment are delivering some very large packages of work. and each will have set management structures in place to be able to deal with the size and complexity of the packages that they are going to deliver. Obviously, BBB, I'm part of the JV delivering there, and we've got a £6 billion plus project. And we'll have a team of people who are used to delivering a project of that scale and complexity, even if we have it split down into sublots. And sort of, it's quite a different model that you project for phase 2A to continue the main line heading north, where most of the people who would like to come and build that for you are already working for you, but working in quite different styles to the smaller packages that you're then thinking of procuring in phase 2A. And I wonder whether actually you're losing some of the capability that you're spending quite a lot of money building up within the first phase in how you plan to deliver the second.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm very conscious of the time. Was your point quick, Andrew? You put your hand up.
Yeah, kind of support. You can, as you can imagine, it kind of supports what Julian is saying, in that I'm intrigued. Phase 1 was all about having big packages of work, and the reason for that, as I understood it, was to ensure that we could draw, that the UK could draw on the expertise in Europe on how to build a high-speed railway. So in that sense, it leads to joint ventures between UK contractors and European contractors that have that HS2 experience. Now, so thinking into phase 2A, one would have thought that was still some value in providing that opportunity. So if you have very small contracts, then it clearly that will be sort of tripping over ourselves, having those massive or large scale or JVs between quite large contractors.
Yeah, so look, I take on the feedback, and obviously this phase 2A civil scheme is, like I say, 2.2 billion. It is actually smaller than some of the elements of phase 1. So they are it's a different type of part of the project. Now phase 2B is different again. So and we'll see a different strategy for phase 2B, I'm sure. But in phase 2A, we do want to leverage the outcomes and what we've done on phase 1 and some of the learning. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in mega contracts or IPT. We can still leverage some of the learning. So it's in discussion at the moment. That strategy will be shared, like I say, prior to engaging the market. But I think that always helpful to get that feedback, and always feel free to provide that feedback through our supply chain team. Robin and the team will always manage that for us. Thanks, Julian and Andrew.
Thank you very much. So we are just about to run out of time. I can't see any more questions coming up. There's one pressing question for myself, Andrew. Are you related in some way to the Cubits who built most of London going back many years ago?
There aren't many Cubits knocking around, so you never know.
Yeah. Anyhow, it's nice to see a good construction name coming back again in the
exactly.
for HS2. So I can see no more questions coming in either form. So I think, Daniel Jackson's put one in. I'm sorry, I didn't meet you. I didn't spot yours, Daniel. Phase 2A ACW opportunity at a very tight turnaround. Please can you continue to engage with CECA on future opportunities? That's nice, Daniel. The more notice, the better. Is appreciated as a smaller tier 1 contractor. The opportunity to help future packaging is appreciated. CECA are best place to support as ensures openness for all contractors. So thank you, Daniel. I think we'd all agree with that. So, yeah, and it's great.
Great one to finish on. Yeah, I agree.
Great, all the engagement we've had with you, and thank you both very much for coming and talking to us today. And I'd like to thank Marie-Claude, who's been operating the controls of all this in the background. So thank you very much, MC. So unless there's any final gasp, I think we'll call it a day. I mean, we'd all give you a round of applause, but it doesn't really mean quite the same thing online. So I'll certainly do that. Thank you both very much.